I was fighting against adversity. It's a very special feeling to be part of humanity. Then an inner voice, that made me feel like it belonged to Saint Germain, said inside me, "You are a hero, keep going, don't stop." The brothers of Cuautitlán followed a Satchela, 5th degree of royal initiation, divine disciple, of the GFU, which is why no brother could be before this master. However, despite this, they continued to express their sincere surprise at my enigmatic way of being, and at the fact that I had mysteriously appeared, in the style of Saint Germain, as they joked, writing the book of the Christic line. "Why, the owner of the place once told me about it." "Brother, I want to tell you, that your book was read by Reverend Gagpa of the Lajeev University of US, some of whom you may know. His name is so-and-so." This reverend in particular was upset, because the book was written by a mysterious person of dubious origin. He literally said, "How dare you write such a book, when you don't belong to, or hold a high hierarchical position in the GFU? It's ridiculous, brother, don't you think?" Indeed, it was, because they were uncomfortable with a person of such a lower rank writing such a profound book, even though it legally belongs to the official hierarchy. Americo Living Trail 282. Furthermore, a few years later, when I went to the ranch of the now Guru, Shea Michan, at the time, when I was trying to personally teach him Merkaba meditation, which, of course, he couldn't learn, simply because he couldn't understand it. It was during one of those 3 or 4 days, that I was at his ranch, attended by his protégés, that he liked to invite me to do the yoga and meditation session in the part of the large room at the back that was still half finished. When we stayed talking for a while after our session, he told me about the value of my book Christian Line, which he liked to read. And suddenly, he became thoughtful, as if a little sad or worried, and made an unexpected confession, saying, "Too bad, brother. That Maestro Marcelli, who was still physically alive, decreed that his head be cut off, when he gave the order that this book of his be banned from the GFU." I remember that his confidential confession surprised me a little. But I immediately remembered what the leaders had said about it. And I was able to understand it. It truly amused me that someone, due to being officially lower in the hierarchy, couldn't be considered capable of addressing a topic, being considered, a priori, incompetent. But it wasn't the only comical case I encountered. I remember a woman I met before my retirement, who, when I saw her again recently, said to me very angrily, "I'm angry with you, because knowing that we needed you, you dared to disappear." I laughed at this attitude, and said to him without words, "Excuse me, sister, I had to leave, because I went to enlighten myself. But it won't happen again, I promise." Our human incomprehension often leads to laughable situations. Reasons like this made it urgent for a real group to emerge, so that they could know the truth and dare to be happy. So every Saturday the meetings continued. Sometimes only 5 people showed up, and other times there were more than 10. Them in a straightforward manner. I taught them yoga, breathing, meditation, astrology, and so on. Then, we ate and talked in a particularly pleasant and fraternal way. It was a unique experience, like an oasis in the middle of the desert. When I left there with my wife, she was my strength. Simple things like grabbing a bite to eat on the way out, or visiting the mall filled me. It's hard to explain this kind of ecstasy of love. It was incredible to have a wife, even though I had been through a retreat. Clearly, God had given me the gift of being back in the world. Without someone with even a minimal social status, I would have had to remain uprooted from society. Americo Living Trail 283. I knew practically everything a man could want from a woman. So much so, that I even considered never marrying again. So in my own conscience I could not even question the fact that this woman standing next to me was definitely a cosmic woman. The couple. But despite my knowledge, I didn't know everything about couples. For example, I began to realize that the idea that we find our soulmate to solve our human life is the biggest lie ever spread about romantic love. Because in my experience, a relationship, no matter how perfect, doesn't solve the personal external life of either of the lovers. Solving our life is possible, but only when we enter into interdimensional sexuality. Therefore, whether or not our partner is our soulmate is fine. Because in reality, if we are happy with a partner, they are, by this very fact, our soulmate at that very moment, even if they aren't. Grasping this is fundamental to the fulfillment of romantic love. As humans we have flaws, but as beings, never. This is why it is understood that, even if a woman or a man is cosmic, they have defects. Cosmic women are basically women of love. There are true women who, for this very reason, are accustomed to love. On the other hand, cosmic men are basically men of wisdom. Not just intellectuals but real scientists. That is, science and religion unified. The union of both results in love wisdom. Anyway, according to what I was experiencing in my recent relationship, a woman can be very evolved and love unconditionally, yet even then, remain asleep for eternity, and think she's perfectly awake. For her love to be love wisdom, she must awaken. This is precisely what some of Walt Disney's films teach, where the prince finds the sleeping princess, and then kisses her, awakening her. Real men are those princes who kiss their beloved. This is what the film Sleeping Beauty is about. For example, this cosmic man appears, if the woman is real and vice versa. A sleeping man cannot awaken La Bella Dormiente. He must first awaken himself. Once he does, he discovers he has yet to learn how to love, and he returns to the world to recreate it. Americo Living Trail 284. As a great psychologist teaches that Master Esther liked to recognize, when he referred to that every man carries within himself an Eve who must awaken, and every woman carries within herself an Adam who must awaken. When I met the woman who would become my wife, I couldn't understand how this woman could be with her partner just out of love, without even demanding that he spend money on their children. Little by little I began to understand that she was with that man out of love, not to solve her own material problems, and since she had the bare minimum, she didn't ask him for money. This is incredible for a Western woman of average culture. But not for a woman who has developed conditional love into pure unconditional love. So from the beginning, she let me run my life, and was with me truly out of love. However, she wasn't perfect. She slept divinely. When I found out she'd been serving at the renowned institution where she worked for 16 years, I almost fell over backward. The first few times I accompanied her to check her time card, both in and out. It seemed like a terrible limitation on human freedom. I had imagined that, as soon as we got married, she would drop everything, and we would move in together without any schedule. But she had a mission to fulfill here. And if, at the same time, I took on a mission with the world, then I had to stop seeing her, and resign myself to living apart from her. Getting tangled up in the world and its endless temptations, which basically refer to the appearance of lovers in my life. Or to forced celibacy. Since I didn't know what to do, for a while I wandered like a fool around their customs and ways of life, their work, their love for their children, their domestic life, their ties with their family, and, finally, their environment. But, just as I made the decision to forgo developing other groups in various places, in order to focus on a pilot group, I also thought it was well worth my time to personally initiate her to accelerate her awakening, and in addition, my mission to the world would be fulfilled. I had to become very humble to change quantity for quality, and so I did. The teacher's vows and the purchase of a computer. This vow of not touching money is a very interesting one that, if all of humanity were to carry it out, the myth of happiness based on money would end in no time. What this vow allows, is to fully develop a sense of belonging in everything we see and touch. When we achieve this, money is no longer the foundation of our lives. Americo Living Trail 285. Not touching money doesn't literally mean not having money, credit cards, possessions, etc. This has been a mistaken way in which many initiates have understood a vow of abundance, as a vow of poverty. But that's not really what it's about. Any wealthy businessman or woman can try the vow of abundance, misnamed poverty. It doesn't mean they have to literally lose their money or their livelihood. In fact, every human being willing to be happy without depending on money must take this vow of abundance. Only then will they be able to understand that money is a social instrument and nothing more. In fact, during my retreat I was able to understand the time-space relationship of money. If we make space poverty, we experience misery in time. But if we make space belonging, We experience time as consciousness. I realized that misery does not exist, only the miserable. So when I talked about belonging, I was referring to the ability to feel that, being the center of the universe, wherever we were the owners. I had meditated enough to realize that, if I truly intended to be happy in this life, I must take the vow of abundance. This is why, when I married her, and also established a contract with my students, I never allowed them to burden me financially. I only wanted them to value my work, and pay me for my services. Since these were spiritual matters, they had to spiritualize themselves, and love the Master, to provide for his needs in exchange for what he was giving them. All my disciples alike, including her, had to act in everything, including financial matters, out of conscience, and out of love for the teacher. This approach to love before money makes us such wonderful people that, in my case, for example, when I got married I never had the curiosity to check the bi-weekly payment card they give him at the clinic where he works. I don't know exactly how much he earns. Nor do I allow financial discussions to take up more time than they should, at the right time. Because life is all about love, not becoming money mad. By the law of love, which is the law of attraction, the more we talk about life in terms of money, the more the misery of the world and the anguish of losing everything become attached to us. And the more we experience life itself, the more our entire world becomes one of unfailing abundance. Americo Living Trail 286 At least for the great masters of wisdom of all time, and for lucky humans, it always happens that way. Including me. In our marital relationship, she assumes the usual expenses of her life, and this includes using her money as she wants, and best she can. If she invites me to lunch once, that's fine, but if she wants to invite me 10 times in a row, I can't accept it. I try to be balanced in what she can give me. It's understandable why I haven't allowed her to fully cover the expenses my children usually require. And, yet she offered them her house, making some rooms available. When I really can't solve my situation, I have to keep quiet, and she has to understand my need, and then, if it's her wish, she gives what she considers and can give. A true teacher cannot say, "I want to eat cakes right now, so buy them for me." In reality, disciples and supporters should study what the teacher likes and needs. Unfortunately, despite the supposed wisdom enjoyed by so-called human civilization, humanity in general has nothing designed to enable a master to survive in the concrete jungle. Have we strayed so far from true wisdom? There was money, but it was to support my children's urgent primary needs and to occasionally be able to treat her to a meal, or give her a small gift. But it's impossible for a teacher to serve humanity without material surpluses. We still can't understand that to those who have, more will be given, and to those who don't have, even what they have will be lost. Because if someone is happy, we instinctively don't want them to have more, even if it's their due, and all we do is push them away from our lives. So it's a difficult task to educate disciples to assume the responsibility of paying for the right to have the teacher with them in a direct and privileged teaching. My whole work consisted of this. They gradually woke up, and sometimes some agreed to pay a monthly allowance. Others were slowly, because those close to me were constantly going through transformative crises of their being, and many couldn't handle it. Some advanced students had problems with their husbands, when they realized they loved their teacher, which left the narrow-minded husbands in the background. Then, like good males, they fought for possession of their female, and they themselves were faced with the dilemma of having to decide between staying with the teacher or literally following their husbands, unconsciously, as they had always done. Several of them left for this reason. Others were so brave that, although their males fought, they didn't care if their relationship ended in a painful divorce or separation. And Americo Living Trail 287 preferred the teacher. Of course, this isn't pleasant. Ideally, all members of a family should be able to integrate into a higher reality, but that isn't always possible. Each one had to live through his own trials. I felt the need to take a computer course, and she, as a disciple, along with other women, agreed on the matter. So some of these students took the initiative, and paid for a 6-month computer course for me. During this course, I made good friends, and learned the basics. But another need arose linked to this, and that was that now I needed a computer and a printer with a scanner. For this to be possible, a sum of money was required that ranged between 15,000 and 20,000 pesos, at least. How would I get this money if, according to my vow of abundance, I I can't touch money. At that moment my wife spoke to the group and said, I've been saving up some money over the past few months, and I have 15,000 pesos available to buy the computer and printer the teacher needs. All my brothers opened their eyes wide, especially because the master was supposed to own his wife's belongings, and yet they discovered that the master in no way disposed of his wife's money as he pleased. Rather, he respected her, just as he did all his disciples. Immediately, another sister took courage and said, I'm putting up 10,000 pesos to make this purchase. It was in this way that I obtained my computer and printer, and was able to begin editing various writings that I sent to this group, so that the teaching would be more fluid. Shortly after, I was going to make improvements to the computer, but for now I was able to start working in a more modern way, appropriate for the time. White magic. The events that followed my mystical and civil marriage began to connect me to the eternal feminine, not in a common way, but in a way that was specifically related to the events of the world, and, therefore, of humanity. A very special decree began to take hold in my mind, which says, Americo Living Trail 288 I am the violet light that illuminates the world. I was busy trying to apply ways to protect myself through magic, trying to find geometric figures and special prayers to help me feel better. It wasn't an obsession with becoming a great magician, but simply that something was bothering me, and I wanted it to stop. If it continued to bother me, then I had to find a solution. This is how I discovered some things. For example, regarding Solomon's seal, I could clearly sense that I am the presence of the ascended Solomon resurrected. One day, when I was walking down the street, I tried to protect my chakras by invoking the eternal feminine called Shakti. Then she appeared naked in my mental field. A truly beautiful woman. But I could only see her in profile, almost from behind. Her goddess-like skin was white, and her feminine forms were very attractive, not in a coarse way, but sublime. The vision lasted a fraction of a second, unforgettable. I was struck by the sight of her, especially because it showed me that she is a being who, if she exists, is very real. So from now on, I protect my chakras with her divine presence. Sometimes, I place this goddess on the seven-pointed flaming star, her forearms, 2 legs, and head. I visualize the eternal feminine in this way, and then place it on the chakras. I close this talisman with a circle, symbolizing the movement of motionlessness, and say, I am Shakti, eternal love. He sensed that she was the goddess of 1,000 petals. I imagine Shakti as the infinite mirror of life, the resonator of the Creator, the eternal movement. And the point of contact between God and Shakti is sometimes called Supreme Consciousness, Samadhi, Nirvana, Absolute. So, I am Shakti, the mystery of God, the goddess of goddesses and of men. From the silence the inner voice tells me, finally here is your virgin, brother. In this regard, I was telling my wife that the day was near when women would attend a school, where they would be taught to be sensual on the fly. Cultivate beauty. They would learn to behave like voluptuous women in intimacy with their partners and dress without false modesty, with little garments to attract their lovers. But men must also be educated not to treat women brutally. Americo Living Trail 289 Around March 98 I found myself restless, because I couldn't visualize, or accept the color black in my mind, so my intuition told me that when this happened I should turn it into violet. March 21st, 1998 AT the Hidalgo ASRHAM. On March 21st of that same year, we went to the ashram of Hidalgo and events occurred that, for me, were not coincidental. Indeed, on March 21st, we arrived at the ashram of Hidalgo with a smaller, but also stronger, group. I already considered in my mind that the so-called triple flame of the heart blue, golden yellow, and pink, spoken of by the metaphysical followers of Saint Germain had a very special power. I enjoyed moving it in a spiral, and it made me feel very peaceful. Therefore, I gave special consideration to this triple seal of the New Age. The basis of eternal peace is the Son of Man, symbol of La Era Aquarius. On that March 21st, I had in mind the ceremony that Drive de la Ferrier had taught to the GFU missionaries. Influenced by this, I decided to practice a kind of ceremony as a form of white magic for protection for our group, and generally speaking, everyone agreed. The owner of this place in Hidalgo offered us a cabin that, if we fixed it up quickly, by removing the few odds and ends found there, we could use to perform our ceremony. I remember well that on that special day, we were heading toward that little cabin and a boy named Emmanuel took our hand, getting out with us, that is, with my wife and me. Then I said to her, "Let's go to the cabin." And this kid, what's his name? Emmanuel, that is, got with us, he responded, aware of what was happening. The cabin door had a padlock and we also had permission to break it. Angel jumped into the cabin through a missing plank. Another man named Ulises offered his help, but Angel wanted to try to open the door himself. However, even though Angel was inside the cabin, he couldn't force the lock with his makeshift lever. So Ulises decided what he had to do. He grabbed a large rock and began to break it from the outside. I thought I could help him, but it wasn't to be. Ulises was determined to open that door, and since the previous rock wasn't enough, I grabbed another larger rock and hit the lock more accurately until it broke. Then, as a group, we all prepared the temple. A sister named Gabriela suggested that we do all this right in the field, since the place seemed too small. But I explained to her that the important thing was to perform this symbolic service, and that's why we had to clean up, and then carry out the La Ceremonia. In ceremony, everyone began to participate in the improvised construction of the temple. Americo Living Trail 290. Angel fulfilled the order to make the Aquarius cross, with the New Age seal in the center, but he only included the symbols for Taurus and Scorpio. I was assigned to add the Aquarius and Leo seals. The seal in the center was indeed the triple flame. Martha helped draw it, but when I wanted to include the colors of the triple flame heart in the center, I realized I only had blue. Then Gabriela and Horatio said they had those colors, but they would have to bring them from their car. The effort they would have to make to get them wasn't going to be so easy, since the car was a bit far. But I decided it was worth it, so to complete the triple flame heart, they went to get those missing colors. Above the Aquarius column, we placed the image of the Master of La Feria, and in the Leo column, which corresponds to the feminine, there was no image above this column. I had my wife put the paper with the Leo symbol in this column, after she had drawn it herself. And I took care of the same thing with the Aquarius one. When she tried to place the Leo symbol in the corresponding column, she couldn't, so I helped her. When we began our meditation, the clock read 12:44, a time that almost coincided with the beginning of the new year, 2 p.m. I had them mentally prepare to bring the blue flame from the sun and cast it down to this place. Then we proceeded to perform our ceremony, using what little I had learned about it. And when it came time to bless each brother individually, I had a hard time deciding, because I didn't want to fall into fanaticism, but I didn't want to fall into false modesty either. However, they expected something from me, something more. The first to kneel before me was my own wife, while she devoutly held the Book of the Great Messages, in photocopies. I touched her with my right hand between her eyebrows and the crown of her head, and blessed her with love, aware that only the Guru blesses in this way, for which I mentally excused my personal attitude. Then I asked whoever wished to come forward to receive the blessing to do so. In general, everyone decided to kneel, and while I placed my hand on their heads, I concentrated on I am the Christ presence of the most sublime Master, I am the Christ presence of the sublime elder brother, and I visualized them. Afterwards, La Ceremonia, my wife told me that when I blessed her it was a bit of a surprise, but she immediately knew, for some reason, that now all of these are becoming priests of God. When we left the cabin, she told me that during her stay in the cabin, she had noticed some codices with very ancient hieroglyphics and that we, as a group, were reactivating them. Americo Living Trail 291. Christ enters my world. 2 days after this event, I found myself happily dancing alone in the yoga studio, in front of the mirror, in our home. Something inside me made me wonder what I would do if this work began to reach so many people. I decided to stop worrying about it, because the work is actually entirely by Master de la Ferrier. Then, deep inside, I heard, "So be it." Immediately afterward I felt a very strong energy between my forehead and my seventh chakra, and a voiceless voice proclaimed, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." I understood as if the Master blessed me. Then I remembered my wife, and subtly felt close to her. La Virgin Maria, and said to her, "Bless you." And he answered silently, "Blessed be the Lord, blessed be Christ." On April 28, 1998, as usual, I went out to drop her off at work, and found myself living an ordinary life, so I wanted to be like any other human being. But the power of life within me could no longer ignore the true life, and elevating my mind, I felt the truth affirming itself. I'm the sublime truth of love, and whoever finds love, lives. Then I headed home, and, after turning on the washing machine, I lay face down on the bed and fell asleep. When I woke up, I felt completely normal. I couldn't remember what I had dreamed. That negative force, so sadly familiar, made my ears ring like a riptide trying to block my path. So, using my willpower, I sat down, and, given the circumstances, tried to meditate. Many important external matters seemed to be calling out to me, but as I entered an internal state, they began to fade away. I meditated, elevating myself to a special peace and well-being. I meditated on Christ. Christ is my breath, my love, my life, the sublime, peace, light. And suddenly I came into telepathic contact with the Master. La Ferrier spoke to me. I'm La Luz of the world. I'm La Presentia Christica of the Ascended Doctor of La Ferrier, and you are myself. Now I am Las Violetat, one who lights up the world. Americo Living Trail 292. I wondered, could Dr. de La Ferrier and Saint Germain be the same person? Master Estrada had already commented on the similarity between Dr. de La Ferrier and Saint Germain, especially since they were both counts and high initiates. Then the voice spoke again. I'm the Christ presence of Drive de La Ferrier. I'm La Presentia Christica of the Ascended Saint Germain. I'm La Presentia Christica of the Most Sublime Master. I'm the Christ presence of the Sublime Elder Brother. But this man is a great intellectual. How could I be him? I asked. Brother, Christ does not depend on the intellectual, not on talents, not on the whims of humanity, but on La Kargat plan of God. Peace be with the Son of Man. You are now responsible for ensuring that the plan is fulfilled. Brother. What's with all this, brother? I thought rebelliously. You are myself, not man, but Christ as always. You are my brother in blood, and in the light, light without shadow, light in the light, blood of light. From the beginning of this experience, the room where I was, had been filled with light, and it was not like the other times, when I heard little voices inside me, but this time the contact was so close, that for a moment I thought Drive de La Ferrier would rush him here himself. It was the first time I had experienced something like this. It was surely a new and very real pact, like nothing I had ever had before, with this presence called Dr. de La Ferrier. Adamaso was categorically affirming to me, this time, that he was an ascended being, just as I had always suspected. And later, the Master D himself, La Ferrier, would confess to me that, just as he was in constant contact with me, so was Saint Germain with him. It made sense, since I was experiencing it too. In a way, the path in its higher reality is like that. But as soon as I hesitated for a moment, evil forces began to mock me, and tried to imitate that presence that enveloped all my physical cells with light. Then I said, in the name of my mighty presence I am, Satan, go away, you will not tempt the Lord your God, and you will serve only him. 3 times. The doctor approached again. La Ferrier. Christ is physical, referring to himself. You are physical. Americo Living Trail 293. Arise and go into the world. He did not say to me, go into the world, but he meant that I should naturally follow my path, whether in my own world, or in the world. In secret you are Christ. I immediately remembered my wife and asked, and her? Always Christ, you and her, she and you, love. Then I thought I saw Magdalena and Jesus Christ, perhaps I was just remembering them. Immediately, what Dr. Di Gonzalo had experienced La Ferrier with Madame Louisa came back to me, only to finally find someone else in Europe. and I remembered myself searching for the path of love with women who didn't reciprocate, but I insisted on experiencing them in the continuity of my femininity that was meant to be, until this became a reality. "I'm Jesus Christ," a voice said, and at the same time the face and surroundings of Jesus Christ quickly appeared on my mental screen. Then he disappeared. Once again, I hesitated and didn't know what Dr. de la Vega's true Lothair, undisguised image would be like. I felt the pressure of uncertainty again, and then I heard a voice that wasn't my own, physically. "Carnal conscience, do not doubt, I remain calm, in grace of light, love and abundance." Again there were imitators. And this time it was me who said, "Do not doubt, carnal conscience. I'm the law of forgiveness and the violet flame, the consumer of all inharmonious action and human conscience." So the hosts are of laws used to me. "It is not man but Christ, always Christ," the doctor answered me. "Point Lothair. It's not always death, it's the resurrection." This is what the master told me, when I wondered, if death existed unrealized, that the destiny of mortals was truly the resurrection, the birth of the Christian line. These experiences were leading me to important decisions regarding my experimental pilot group. But I had no idea what they might be about. These days I'm starting to study the book called Regina, written by Antonio Velasco Pina, which is about the Queen of Mexico, and tells that she, Regina, was born precisely on March 21, 1948. It strikes me that it was the year in which, according to the Dr. Aquarius Americo Living Trail 294, Lothair begins La Era. And in that book, it is written that Regina had the mission of saving Mexico, and from a very young age she was transferred to Tibet, just as the Chinese invaded. After being trained there by a Tibetan master, who lives with her in Retiro, she went to live in a kind of orphanage in China, and when she was released she returned to Mexico before March 21, 1968. The book titled Regina wasn't one I had bought, it was already at my wife's house. And not just this book, but others, such as, for example, The Black Book of Freemasonry by Drive de Lothair. And another important one entitled Satan and Company by a well-known Mason. Later, she would buy the works of Zecharia Sitchin and Brunvallo Melchizedek. All of this meant not only recovering some I already had, but also adding others, which would powerfully influence my life. This time, Regina's work set the tone for the series of pilgrimages I would undertake, along with my few students, throughout the Mexican Republic. Regina arrives in Mexico, entering through Veracruz, because she senses that it is better to enter through the Atlantic Ocean than through the Pacific. She knows that they are waiting for her in Teotihuacan, and she ascends the Pyramid of La Luna, on that special day, March 21, 1968, together with the guardians of La Tradición Iniciática Mexicana. The reason for climbing the pyramid that day, and doing it in a special way, was to activate it, or, rather, unmask it and produce a crisis in the Mexican people with the eminently positive objective of awakening them to a new state of consciousness, and that, in this way, they would have the opportunity to temporarily escape from the prison produced by the lunar force. Their mission included awakening Popocatépetl and Ixtlahuatl, because sacred volcanoes and mountains always influence the awakening of humanity living near them. The idea was to gather 400,000 people in the Zocalo Square to perform a ritual of a magnitude equal to the awakening of all of Mexico. The plan was that when the 400,000 people were gathered, the bell of the cathedral in the center of Mexico City would be rung. The entire cathedral is like a great musical instrument, prepared for this type of ritual. This was accomplished. And with this, Popocatépetl awoke. However, he realized that it hadn't been enough to awaken Ixtlahuatl, the sleeping woman. These mountain volcanoes are linked to the destiny of the Mexican people, because their geomagnetic energy is what stimulates the awakening of their consciousness. Thus, following the tradition of the destiny of the initiated heroes, she decided to sacrifice herself along with 400 authentic Mexicans in the famous Tlatelolco massacre on October 2, 1968, with the primary goal of awakening Ixtlahuatl. With a seemingly absurd act, according to her La Tradición Mexicana, the awakening of the sleeping woman began. In any case, physical death does not seem to me to be the best option for this blood to allow our people to live on. La red lunar point, because it is the reason for the existence of wars and periodic catastrophes that darken the future of all life under the law of the survival of the strong over the weak. I prefer that humanity achieves its awakening through La red decrest consciousness. Americo Living Trail 295. But in any case, at this point in my life, learning about Regina had a powerful impact on my journey. She had a special respect for the 13th, and it was on September 13, 1968, that she led the so-called Silent March, which brought back a particular memory of the period of silence I experienced near the end of my own retreat, as a form of protest against the abuses of the authorities against a sleepy population. That march must have had a profound effect on the evolution of Mexico, which, as I understand it, has to do with the sign of Scorpio. It also caught my attention, because it was on September 13, in 1997, that I became bound in a mystical wedding to my wife at the ashram of Hidalgo. And then, on September 16, Miguel Hidalgo gave the cry of independence September 16, 1810. Since I had experienced things very recently and first-hand, this seemed particularly interesting to me. After I went to the ashram of Hidalgo, the liberator of Mexico, I began my relationship with the woman who would become my wife. Regina was able to move the energy law and give the Mexican people a chance to awaken. But something was missing, and I didn't know what it was. This was something that moved me deeply. Regina had spoken of how combining various metals created certain special alloys that served as musical instruments to awaken people and connect with the music of the spheres, the cosmos. What particularly caught my attention was that she spoke of a metal made from 12 alloys. 12 metals combined in a special way under certain astrological aspects, that is, on certain dates. The result was lumbago, a metal with a vibration very similar to gold. I was doing this, and on Wednesday, May 6, 1998, I went to teach a class with my student named Angel, whom I hoped would be a good student in my advanced work. Then, for some reason, the subject of crosses came up. Just as in the GFU solar line crosses are used as a symbol of degrees of consciousness, so are the metaphysics schools, in one of which my student was a teacher. He then showed me an equal-armed cross, a Maltese cross, with the heart in the center la cruz. He showed me the model of the cross usually given to metaphysics students, and also a larger one. I asked him what it was for, and who it was for. Not for anyone, yet, but someday I'd like to use it myself. I knew it was time for us to make the Christ line crosses. I thought of that name, because it was the title of the book I had just written. In fact, about 2 weeks earlier, I had already conceived the idea of the triple flame seal having the names of the 3 archangels surrounding it, like a circle, you shall not pass. The names of these archangels are Michael, Chamuel and Jophiel. When I was thinking about it, I felt inwardly that this was much more protective than the triple flame heart without the protective circle. So the improved design gave it a more powerful character in terms of white magic. Americo Living Trail 296. Regarding this matter of forming a Christ line, I wasn't specifically referring to creating another line apart from La Jeef the US solar line. This would have been foolish if it were simply a personal whim. What I was trying to do was simply add a man to the work of my group, and if this proved useful, then extend it to the formation of groups. The Christ line was encompassing a direct line of the living path, and that was fundamental. But I wanted to give it form, so that people could have access to the message I myself represented through the experience of my retreat and all its consequences. So when my student confided in me that he was in charge of making the crosses for the metaphysics students, I realized it was time for us to make the Christ line crosses, without having thought of this before. At that moment, I told him they should be ready by July 28 of the same year, 1998, because that is Master Estrada's birthday. And since I didn't feel I had the right to declare myself a master on my own, I thought Master Estrada would place them through me, to give continuity to the sacred initiatic tradition. I wanted to become a suitable medium, so that Master Estrada could continue putting up crosses. He always had the masters in mind. At that moment I go to the bathroom and a voice tells me, Christline is being born. When I came back from the bathroom I said to Angel, I don't want these crosses to be silver, because this has a lunar vibration, and increases our movement's popularity, but not a true awakening of consciousness. At this point, I was beginning to understand Master Estrada differently, as it had been important to him that the cross be made of silver. But he had seen the consequences this metal had on the human consciousness, or rather, the unconsciousness. He wanted to try something different. So, I continued, I want the crosses to be made of copper, the metal of love. I was thinking about what Master de la Ferrier and astrology in general teach. Namely, that copper has a vibration related to the planet Venus, and Venus is the planet of love, and the sacred management of money. I left there, and my student was very excited about the perspective that all the work of our pilot group was taking. I remembered well what the masters had told me during my retreat, that my first disciple and my own wife would be the foundation of my work, and that I had to be so sacred and intelligent, that neither of them would become involved in physical sexuality. Above all, I trusted my wife, because I knew her. So I ruminated within myself. Americo Living Trail 297. That day, next July 28th, I'm going to give my wife and this advanced student a cross a little larger than the rest, but also a little smaller than mine, all out of respect for the hierarchy. But if they weren't ready for this, I'd wait for someone who was. Later I began to think that the copper cross should have a bit of tin on the back, because by then, my friend Angel had little time that had allowed me to make photocopies of Saint Germain's book called Holy Trinosophy, in which Master Saint Germain gives very important keys to many symbols, among which one that strongly caught my attention refers more or less to the following. The bronze from which the serpent is made, is a mixed metal, composed of copper and tin. That is, indicating the duality of matter, and with this, it is not a serpent but two serpents, the two serpents of the great arcanum in one, that is, the Christ line. This is the serpent that represents Kundalini and the spine. It is the energy that gives forth La Illuminación, because it moves from the base of the spine and passes through the skull, into LLs. And Tensis, a sword, a symbol of discernment and determination to overcome. It is with this, that the disciple's intelligence becomes clear and flows freely, driving away the nightmare monsters. Then, Master Saint Germain continued speaking about the importance of the sound associated with copper and tin, and explained that the sound emitted by the serpent corresponds to the Anahata chakra, associated with the bell and the heart itself. He explained that this is where the soul resides in its life aspect. This is where the Son of God attunes to true life with its frequency, which, of course, directly influences his actions, feelings, and thoughts, sublimating them. Later, he relates this bronze serpent, or rather, one of copper and tin, to a serpent coiled 12 times around a spear, sprouting wings to fly. It is a flying serpent, and therefore, one that sublimates vile sexuality into something subtle and spiritual. He further explains that the spine consists of 33 vertebrae, but with the vertebrae transformed into the head, it actually reaches 35, a number that La Illuminación Pusto Gautama Buddha reached at age 35, and in the New Age at age 36, taking a step further to have the power to seal the door where evil resides. This means that the serpent truly manages to transform into a flying bird, with which human beings acquire the power to cure their brothers and sisters from the evil desire of ignorance. When I see my student Angel again, he informs me that adding gold to the center of the cross, to represent the golden yellow flame within the heart of the triple flame, is very expensive. However, the same man who makes the cross is offered to name it Dumbago. This is something I had just studied in Regina, and because of which I already knew that this is the metal made of 12 metals. Is that okay? I wonder. I almost fell backwards with surprise and the positive certainty of this. Americo Living Trail 298. Regina speaks of the Dumbago to generate a sound that produces music of the spheres, according to the capacity of awakening consciousness of each human being who has adequate contact with said metal. Chance had become causality, and I immediately told her yes, our crosses should bear Dumbago instead of gold. This would keep her vibrant in all the life situations the student would face, and also in her own thoughts and feelings, so that they would devolve towards solar radiation. What I was doing was largely intuitive, but, evidently the last thing I was interested in was generating yet another sect. I hadn't been prepared so patiently and emergently as to end up in such nonsense. I simply wanted to create a magic talisman, so that my students would be protected from all the changes that consciousness undergoes when it approaches not simply my school of transformative astrology, but a pilot group that was receiving a very special type of consciousness, even different from that logic permitted by the solar line. I was simply creating a powerful talisman to protect my students, and give them the opportunity to move forward in their work. So I remembered very well what Master Estrada explained: the cross protects the one who carries it, freeing them from all evil, but it never protects them from themselves, unless they are willing to transform their consciousness. Along with this project, I began to experiment with a series of technical developments in elemental white magic. For example, when forming the electronic circle, I noticed that, when I did it with a marble knife, the protective effect was more effective, and I felt something inside me say, "The Son of Man discovers in his time what he must discover." Following a magic instruction manual in those books they sell around here, I take already magnetized and programmed holy water and sprinkle it with the marble knife. The cleansing effect on negative charges, to transform them into positive ones in a given location, is much stronger. Also in these months, as July 28th approaches, I find myself talking with my wife about how to make a meditation shawl for each of the members of our pilot group, and she tells me, "I've been thinking, and if you notice, the people who went to Hidalgo's ashram this last time formed the triple flame. Well, only you, 3 sisters, and I went. And for some reason, the others couldn't go. They lacked that strength." We talked about the matter for a while, and then she, with her intuition, realized something very interesting. "Since you're telling me that each person responds psychologically to a ray, according to Tibetan teachings, why not take the color of that ray to make your meditation cloak from the color?" Americo Living Trail 299. It was true. If the women of the group were going to be declared priestesses and the men masters, why not give them a mantle that corresponds to the color of the ray with which each one vibrates? So I decided that the students, just as they have a zodiac sign, would also have the ray with which I considered them most compatible. This was taking shape in a more definite way. I had the idea of creating crosses, to motivate them to take the living path. But I wasn't willing to let them start with a pre-initiatory, and all that. Because my strength wasn't the same as that of Lajif the solar line, where there is an entire structure generated by the Master of Law and Master Estrada, and through which pre-initiatory and initiatory schools can be established in one or many countries. I was alone, working with a small group, and yet I had to share the message I was bringing. For this very reason, and because these people had no knowledge of yoga, vegetarianism, esotericism, and all of these things, they were simply my students, and I wanted to help them, with a trigger to elevate them toward the definitive, and, in a sense, instant search that would give them the opportunity to encounter the Christ of the New Age. Therefore, from this perspective, my seemingly crazy idea wasn't so crazy, considering everything that was happening to humanity. And if we add to the project the fact that I decided to put crosses on them, declaring, from the outset, men masters and women priestesses, when evidently it was only a matter of the opportunity for them to become such, if they could prove it with their fruits. This certainly didn't fit with the teachings of the GFU. First of all, because only women are recognized there as having reached the 2nd or 3rd degree of royal initiation. But a priestess already means they can reach the 6th degree of royal initiation, according to Master de la Ferrier. And when I declared men masters, I was already referring virtually to the 4th degree of royal initiation. Of course, I was aware that, by imposing this cross on them, all of this wasn't real, but a possibility I was acknowledging. It's like recognizing any human being on the street who carries Christ within them, and within them, La Virgin. Not they are already Christ or Virgin. But in essence, they are. What I was doing, was placing them before the true path, and, yet even then, it was they and only they who were going to decide, whether to take it or not. Deep down, I felt that Lajif the solar line, in order to be successful worldwide, and able to infiltrate all social, cultural, sexual, religious, etc. strata, must stop, apparently, limiting the positions of real initiation to a certain number of gurus, satkilas, and all of that, and allow its students to freely make crosses, according to the student's own hierarchy and real mission. These crosses are not definitive in an organized hierarchy, rather, they are simply allowing each student to manage their own teachings, and also to function as a teacher. Americo Living Trail, 300, and each woman as a priestess. From then on, they will have greater freedom to show themselves who they really are, thus awakening authentic respect for the true hierarchy with its limited number of positions. Because it is from all these branches and positions that a true externalization of the hierarchy will be formed. So it's understandable that the GFU solar line won't accept this, at least not easily. But since I was alone, they had no problem reporting to an external boss, institution, or church. So to speak, I had a free hand to do things as best suited me. The date was approaching, and one night I couldn't sleep, so I got out of bed, while my wife continued to rest soundly. I grabbed my blankets, and went downstairs to try to get to sleep. My thoughts were in disarray, and I wanted to understand what it was about. I was trying to form a hierarchy by placing small and large crosses on my students, and with this, I was already entering into head-to-head competition with the GFU solar line. So I realized this wasn't right. The last thing I wanted was such a reckless confrontation on my part. So it occurred to me that all my students who received a cross would wear the same size. I myself would set an example and use a cross of the same dimensions as my students. The various hierarchical ranks would be considered only by the instructor of each group, but the cross itself would be the same size. This way there would be no arguments about who had the larger or smaller cross. After this conclusion, I was able to rest that night. Around June 1998, a period began in which the entities of light expressed their closeness through words of love. Miriam, Moriah's compliment, told me, "We are here, we have bodies of flesh and blood like you. I love you, we love you, I love him, Christ." What the Masters and Ascended Ones inspired in me was an immaculate passion, without being ascended, be as ascended. Once I said, "I am the Christ presence of the Sublime Elder Brother, Estrada." I heard a response. Someone claiming to be the Sublime Elder Brother told me that I was his first disciple, and that he represented a great mystery. For his reason for being, is to be the Father, of the Father, of the Father, and so on ad infinitum. El Moriah tells me, "Now you go from victory to victory, because you have conquered everything." And in these days before the summer solstice I suddenly felt a very great love, and I said with an open heart, Americo Living Trail, 301. I am la resurrección and la vida. I'm la ascensión of la Virgin. No one reaches the Father Mother, if it is not through me. And the one I assume, is the Master of the Fourier answers. She is your soulmate, and from now on you belong to the conclave of the 12. I immediately think of my wife and ask, "Me alone?" "No, you and she are one." Someone who calls himself Gautama Buddha tells me, "I seal you right now, because I want it that way. You are my son, and I'm your heavenly Father." Without any documents or special guidance from a physical master, you accomplish this. The one who calls herself Estrella tells me, "Divine child. Can you imagine how the stars and worlds love each other? Physical orgasm is nothing. You can't imagine what it's like for two soulmates to merge, it's indescribable." Then lately Mercedes speaks, whom I place as my divine feminine of the red Maltese cross on a milky white background, and says, "I'm your orgasm, I'm your daughter, your lover, your wife, whatever you want. I belong to you. I'm a sacred prostitute. You have discovered the key to divine love. I belong to all the Christs, the real initiates. I'm your permanent orgasmic ecstasy." On June 21, 1998, I knew that, according to Greek mythology, the goddess Juno was approaching the planet, as it was the summer solstice. It was Sunday and Father's Day. In the morning, I got up to invoke this goddess, and heard her say to me, "Son of man, what you do, resonates with all of humanity. You are so simple, and that's why we love you. I'm Juno, your mother and beloved, I'm the mother of all things. Ask me for anything you want, and you will always have it." Curiously, that same day, my wife had the idea of taking our children to the museum called Universum, and I agreed. There we found many objects, for example, magnets to expel undesirable energy from human auras, and while we were there, we consecrated some crystals. There was a gigantic snail with a golden spiral, apparently made of bronze. Then we came across a display case that displayed the rock brought from La Luna, but we decided not to touch it. On the way out, I found a stone snake, and stood on its head. It occurred to me to use the mantra, which, according to some, is used to lull and put snakes to sleep. So I said, Aussie Asa Aussie Americo Living Trail, 302, 302. It was as if Juno, Mother Nature, were sharing a few of her countless secrets with us that day. We were a little tired from the tour, and didn't want to visit the part of the museum where the human body is studied. These days, the thought that the New Age requires men among men and women among women, is constantly running through my mind. I mean beings capable of living spirituality in contact with the Father, in spirit and truth. That is, without temples for priests, or special clothing insignia, or any particular creed. Just being a normal, happy human being whatever the cost. It's about lasting happiness, not false happiness. I conclude again that La Grande Fraternité at the New Age does not need missionaries in an external sense, but in a real sense. What was once a solar line becomes a vast institutional administrative apparatus, and then its most advanced members have to manage the monster, and this absorbs so much of their time, that they can't dedicate themselves to their own lives. So they look very good socially, but their internal reality, family, sexual, and everyday life doesn't reach its full potential. It turns out that spiritual institutions also absorb people. There has to be a way to prevent this from happening. Surely Christ didn't want the rich to literally abandon their riches, but rather, their wealth to be integral, surrendered to God, and that was why he created money and human progress. It seems that the simpler God is, the more inaccessible he becomes to the majority. People follow Chinese, Egyptian, Hindu, and other style gurus, but these customs aren't the true ones of the foreigners who generally adopt them. They aren't the natural reality of these people, and so they begin to yearn for a strange spirituality, as if possessed by strange mystical dreams. Without achieving true fulfillment. I think that being able to understand these facts is in line with what the masters told me in my retreat, when they refer to the idea of breaking La Sagrada Tradición initiaticism. Because in reality, it wasn't literally breaking it, as that's impossible, it was simply a matter of making it fit the times, and then it turns out that we don't come to change the laws of this sacred tradition, but precisely to fulfill it. It's not about trying to change it in essence, but rather to adapt it with true realism, free from vested interests. That's why I tell my students, don't leave money, if you have it, don't leave a wife, if you love her, because what's the point of becoming celibate, if we have to keep our little secrets? Conscience cannot be institutionalized. We are not a Sanhedrin obligated to preserve its image. The trials of the initiate and the priestess come to them sooner or later, on their own path. An authentic spiritual institution guides us and does not, therefore, dogmatically impose trials. It seems that the idea that institutions and their members tend to store up treasures on earth, and cannot be free still holds true. So, they are personalities, not children of God. Americo Living Trail, 303, 303. God's method is humility and silence, direct action with life. In institutions, when the individual is known, the goal is to prevent him from acting freely. Then the sense of why a spiritual institution was created is lost. The Tao is the true path as Lao Tzu teaches. He explains that a missionary is one who does not mission, a politician is one who does not engage in politics, action is non-action, etc. All of this truly amounts to God in action. An enthusiastic student tells me, you know the master by his fruits. And my response is, that what we must learn, is to recognize the fruit at the very moment of emergence, when the fruit is still hidden beneath the earth. If we recognize the master who displays nothing outwardly, we can immediately go where the master goes. For example, since John the Evangelist recognizes Christ immediately, by that fact alone, he no longer has to wait like the other disciples. Jesus Christ says, the poor you will always have with you. But this doesn't mean we should allow them to invade our own world. Furthermore, it's not just a matter of material poverty, but, above all, spiritual poverty. That's why when Christ says, you are of this world, he refers to the world of the poor, not because of money, but because of a sense of conscience, or rather, of unconsciousness. About a week before the summer solstice, June 22, 1998, I was visiting the clinic where my wife works. While I was in the waiting room, someone I recognized as the master said to me, you are John. And remember that, in the time of Jesus Christ, Peter had to turn to John, to open the new age. You are my beloved disciple, the star of my rest. You are the last and the last is the first. This makes me think about many things that begin to make sense, and then, almost without wanting to, reviewing the Black Book of La Francmasoneria by Dr. de la Ferrier, I read about Peter and John. Peter establishes the exoteric, external, church, and John the esoteric, internal, church. I also study the last chapter of the Gospel of St. John. I'm beginning to realize that Master Estrada was actually old. He died at 82, when the youngest of the Order of Aquarius. At that time I was in Yamines, the lowest level within the hierarchy of the GFU, and the Order of Aquarius was the one who approached Christ. If it's true that all high initiates come from each new age,